Hello and welcome to the Wild Wild West. My name is Richie Richey of the MHRT Network. Over that away is the real Alex Gibbons. You can catch his content on two different spots. Arrowhead Addict, he writes articles there. Fantastic content. Helps that he edits and critiques grammar for a living as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
Let's be real, not wrong. And you can also catch him on the Lockdown Defense podcast for the Lightning Fast Fantasy podcast with himself and Coach Defense. Great show, great guys. We're getting closer and closer to that day when you guys are
right around the corner, baby.
Yeah, so, getting excited.
Yeah, so we're getting right up to that point. For today's show, we are going to dive right into some interesting information, including where each of our teams are at for the OTAs, some interesting news, a few little kind of fits and spurts that have come out in terms of, ebbs and flows, if you will, with regards to our various teams. And then next week, we are hoping to actually have a few AFC North guests come on to kind of give us some feedback in terms of their teams and stuff. So I'm pretty stoked to get into that kind of stuff. Curious as to your thoughts in the chat. Those who are joining us live, again, those are who are live. Thank you for joining. Who do you think that each of our teams, and this may be different for each team, who do you think each of our teams are going to struggle with the most in the AFC North? For what it's worth, my general feedback and thought is that our division will probably struggle the most with that division just on the onset of the season. So we'll see kind of what happens there. Of course, we have the one, the only, the man, the legend, Mr. Jack Kenna here joining us, giving his insights on his Las Vegas Raiders. At some point, I do expect Robert to come back in and give us his thoughts on the Los Angeles Chargers. However, he is in Los Angeles, and power is apparently an optional thing there.
Commodity. It's like Waterworld.
So, yay. And just for the record, I'm in Canada, by all accounts, a third world country compared to the U.S., and I have power just fine. So that just lets you know the state of Los Angeles.
I got it in Missouri, too, out here in the boonies.
Yeah.
No issues.
Yeah. So yay, L.A.
Yeah, that's the difference between Northern California and Southern California.
Yeah.
It's the wasteland.
Yeah, so we got some interesting stuff for today's show. Really looking forward to your feedback who are joining us live. And for those of you who aren't able to join us live, that's fine. We appreciate you catching us after the fact. Go ahead and click those like buttons, though, especially after the fact and during. Helps us reach more folks just like you so that we can start getting real lively chat and some friendly banter going on between all of our four teams. Because that's really makes the show kind of unique and different, as we have a camaraderie, despite the fact that we're all rivals, and we can all talk openly about the differences between our teams and not lose our minds. So I think that's sometimes. But again,
little sprinkling of
little dusting there of heated moments, right?
That just keeps things going.
Yeah, but that's to be expected when you're passionate about the team that you're following and you disagree with stuff, but. At the end of the day, we all kind of come back and end up with level heads and clearer heads prevail ultimately. So let's jump right into it. Jack, just to discuss your Raiders, curious as to news out of your camp in terms of, the ebbs and flows and whatnot. I think it'll be I think the Raiders is the one team that I'm most curious about this season. I think we kind of have a reasonable idea in terms of what's going to come from Alex's team. I think we have a fairly reasonable, general idea of what's coming from my Denver Broncos. And I think that there's a general blueprint rather we can expect from Robert's Chargers. But I do think that the unknown, if we're going to be honest, like truly honest with one another, and frankly, I think if Raiders fans were also honest with themselves, with AP being in the driver's seat now as a head coach, what is he going to change? What is he going to continue? And what ultimately will that look like?
Oh yeah, Richie, that's a great question because a lot of the unknown is to have this team for the first time going through training camp, OTAs, and everything else under AP versus McDaniels from last year. So it's going to be interesting, just seeing how the culture is changing from when he took over as the interim to now being the head coach. I feel like that's just a ton of positives. When you got guys like Max Crosby saying, "Hey, if he's not going to be on board, if the team's not on board with him, then I can look elsewhere," and that's your guy. And they just extended. They just gave him an extra $6 million this year, and another 1.25 million next year. So I just feel it's a culture shift, and it's really exciting to get back to a different era of Raiders, and I think he's trying to bring that mentality. And it's exciting. I think the whole nation is excited to see this type of culture shift. So that is the thing I'm looking forward to, probably the most, just to see how things are different. And guys are in the building. Guys are like guys like Tyree, who didn't show very much as a number 7 overall pick. He was hurt, having to come in, for what's his name from the Cardinals that just went AWOL and mental, and having him to come in and not play healthy. Yep.
Chandler Jones.
Yeah. And to see, him working out with Max Crosby, in the off season, and, seeing guys like AOC 12 now versus AOC 4 doing the same type of thing. So guys are like getting into the building. So there's a hype kind of going around this. So it is going to be very exciting to see how they perform doing, being excited to be in the building. And, and it's kind of weird. It's like the one thing that was different last year, and I just kind of wonder, I wish Robert was here to answer this. Last year we had no music under McDaniels, and now now there's music. You smoke cigars after games and stuff like that. So it's a looser. They got a basketball little hoop and cornhole and that type of thing going on. And it's kind of interesting to see the Chargers kind of go in the opposite direction. No, we're not allowing any music. So it's just culture shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess what my comment is there, and just, so my thoughts on this are clear, which is I think there's a middle ground. I think that pumping music and throwing hoops and stuff, that's fine and good. Maybe sometimes kind of thing, as like what I used to like
the
about
right
when
set of circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I like what John Fox kind of did with the team as the middle ground between what you're talking about and what you're alluding to, because it's a very much A and B scenario that you're basically hinting at in your comments there. And so what I really like with John Fox, and I think this is the proper middle ground, like the actual proper middle ground, in my opinion. Kubiak, by the way, did the same thing with my Denver Broncos, which is you don't pipe music in during practices. You don't do all those sorts of things. However, when you get the stuff done and do your work and do all the stuff, at the end of those mini camps or at the end of those OTAs or at the end of that stuff, you throw like a golf tournament with the guys where you skip the last practice, you give them the day off, and then you go have like a team building exercise, like, a game of golf or something along those lines. And I like the game of golf because it's less likely to get guys hurt. So yeah. I think you have to pick your team activities wisely. Rock climbing or some other rando sport like that, not a good idea. However, golf or, going to watch another sports team play or something along those lines, I love that as an idea for a team building exercise to kind of go out and give yourself the break. So while I understand where you're coming from in terms of your general comment, I think there's a mix between the two. And I think you need to be careful that you're not inserting fun for the sake of inserting fun without actually focusing on the task at hand. And I think you run the risk of getting away from that.
No. I mean, I do see your point. And, every team's a little different, and I think that's part of the reason why the Raiders, they could have had, training camp in Las Vegas, but they decided to come back to California to get away from everything else. So when you're done with you're doing what you need to do, then you hang out with the fellas. You get to know each other, get that camaraderie, the bonding going on. So I do see being done, and the guys are coming into the building, and Max is kind of leading the charge, and guys are trying to follow him in the way of what he's doing. So there's more work getting put in. So there is a fine balance, but I like what I've seen so far, because seeing it go one so strict before and not work, and then seeing after McDaniel's gone and AP took over, and just see the culture. I mean, it was like a light bulb. Things changed. I mean, it's the same guys. They're running pretty much the same playbook, but every aspect of the game got better for them.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I guess my point is that there's a difference between being a prick and installing a good offense or a good defense, and then having a bunch of dudes getting annoyed with you, right? Like, so as an example, the funny thing is that you can have the same person come and tell you the same thing, like, or even the same person or two different people come and tell you the same thing. However, if the delivery of one is basically, to act like an a-hole, and then the delivery of the other is to come and speak to you, civilly and with a little bit of pep in their step, even though the message may be largely identical, you're probably more likely to be receptive to the latter rather than the former. It's
about the delivery. That's for sure.
And so the real question mark there is, I'd like to see AP succeed. I'd like to actually see him do well enough to, show that he was the right guy for the job, because I think that lends credibility to a guy like Max Crosby for, putting his neck out like he did in terms of the way he kind of pounded the table. And I think that's a good thing. However, I am still genuinely concerned, because I have this approach across the board. Jack, you and I have kind of spoken about this briefly as well. I'm not going to, divulge our private conversation per se, but certainly just kind of say that I'm of the mentality that I want to see what you're going to do. I'm of the mentality that I want to see the product on the field prior to just saying, I'm going to gift you the credit and then, wait to be proven wrong. I think that there's a modest amount of credit that AP has earned given what we saw last year. However, that's after he came in, after having a drill sergeant at the helm before. Now it's all you. You don't get the benefit of having the disciplinarian come before you and then you be like, the good cop. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, it's all got to be proven. It's all going to have to be proven on the field. And, so that is going to be a new challenge for him, because, it's first time doing. But I'm glad he's got, guys that he surrounded himself, like Marvin Lewis, to help him out. And, that aspect, somebody who's been there and done it for I think 10, 11 years or something as a head coach. So, so if he's surrounding himself with the right guys to help him, but it's going to be a learning curve for him. There's no doubt. Anytime you're basically a rookie head coach, you are going to have a learning curve. Yep.
Yeah. And I just hope that I guess the other point I'm making is when you start off being an anti-disciplinarian or like the anti of whatever was before you, and you need to start moving the needle back, you're inevitably always seen as the bad guy.
Well, here, in a way, I'm sorry. And it's like, as a disciplinarian, but the one thing that, you saw on the field is that the Raiders were a lot more disciplined than under McDaniels in the way of penalties and so forth. So attention to detail, and, hey, if you can work it in, that's great. But if it ain't working on the field, then that ain't working. But seeing what he did, culturally wise, the Raiders notoriously, if we looked up the records, what teams, overall had the most penalties for the most amount of years, I'm sure Raiders probably own like the top 15 slots in history. So to go from that extreme to being on the football field and have very little penalties compared to what, the history, the past, and other teams, then that tells me that they're kind of working in the right mix.
I mean, let's be real here, Angelo. Corey Linsley was bound to
retiring.
get released. He's retiring effectively for all intents and purposes. And they just kind of did him a solid just because he did so well for them when he was there.
Yeah.
By releasing him rather than allowing him retire. And now your comment on Leatherwood is well received. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, my man. We'll talk about that a little later in the show. But no, I mean, I agree with you, Jack. I guess what my concern is that, so let's say you start with the left-hand side here where the head coach is almost aggressively disciplinarian.
Mm-hmm.
And then you bring in the interim rather, who is, the exact opposite on the other side of the spectrum. Now, the players are likely going to play somewhere in the middle just because they've been used to such insanity that they're not willing to push the envelope so much because they don't know where the hand's going to come and slap them upside the head. You know what I mean? Because they're so used to the discipline of the former regime that they just kind of are, what can I get away with and how can I do it? And I think naturally they're going to play with a little looser, not as much in their head, and therefore make fewer mistakes. And that often, I think, does translate to fewer penalties on the field because they're not overthinking, nonsense. And I think that holds true. I mean, these guys have been playing to such a high level for so long. At some point, you need to either say, I have a pro and I need to let them play, or you need to just say they can't be on the team. And I think that too many head coaches like McDaniels are almost overly detail-orientated, and they basically hinder the progress of their own team as a result. Now, on the flip side of that, now that AP is on his own, okay, awesome, but I think he needs to find he needs to find his own balance. Like, I'm not saying he needs to be one or the other. I'm not saying he needs to be, Josh McDaniels 2.0, and I'm not saying that he needs to be, hey guys, we're gonna go to the Rippers after the practice. Let's have fun. Like, I think he needs to find his own brand. He needs to find his own, you know what I mean? He needs to find his own way through the NFL. And ultimately, I think the best coaches find their balance somewhere in the middle.
And I'm sure that's what he's trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And again, it's going to be a learning experience, and he's going to learn as he goes. And I'm sure, over time, he's going to change things that, he doesn't see going well. And try to make things, that he saw going well, and just keep promoting as he grows as a head coach.
I agree. So aside from what you're hoping is projected positive culture change, which is kind of how I think is the best way of describing what you're ultimately talking about. What else is coming out of your Vegas Raiders in terms of positives and other changes?
So right now there's not been a ton of like new news. So the things that are been kind of going the talk is still that Colton Miller with his shoulder from last season, still not practicing, sideline stuff. And JPJ, again, after the practice, and again, that's part of maybe the reason why he slipped to the second round, he's kind of doing the same thing. So a lot of the conversation has been about those two guys, as a whole. But it's just, those are the main things. And then a lot of it is about, okay, well, how are we going to use I think the biggest question the Raiders have is their offensive coordinator. It's Getsby. Yeah. It's like, how is he going to, how is he going to use guys? I know we're going to run the ball because he's a run first, offensive coordinator. But how's he going to do things? Where is he going to use players? So everyone is like super curious to see what he does. And a lot of, people in Raider Nation kind of feel like he's kind of the talents around there. It's there. And so it's like, but how does he put it all together? that is like the biggest question mark, going into the season is going to be him. Because, I looked at the Bears last year. I wasn't all that thrilled with them. And, so I just wonder how he's going to go. It's like, yeah, Devontae likes him, but he was the wide receiver coach. Well, that's a big difference between a wide receiver coach and your offensive coordinator. That's for sure. So, and then there's been some talk about Labe. Labe's been stepping up, and I think he's really going to push, Amadullah for a job. Just if Labe can just figure out how to block, then I think the job's going to be his. He's just more talented, catching the ball, special teams. I think he's going to be better, and that's what Amadullah Singh was, third down backs, doing the exact same thing.
And he's younger. So
it's like curious. I'm really curious with that. And then also too, what I've heard is that, in the way of Tyree has spent like the whole offseason with Max. And, trying to learn from him, put in the work ethic and to get there. And I think he could potentially be a changed player now that, he's got a full offseason where he had no offseason last year. Wasn't expected to start with Chandler Jones being out there, coming back, when he wasn't expected to come back. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. And, having a full offseason. I want to see that explosiveness, which I did not see last year. When John Jenkins, your biggest guy, your nose tackle, is getting off the line quicker than your defensive end every single play, it's not
going to have a bad time.
You're going to have a very bad time on the outside. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does this year. And also too, I wonder how Graham is going to mix those, between him and Kuntz, because Kuntz had a good, second half of last year, got 8 sacks. So how are they going to mix them? Because Patrick Graham did a presser and said, well, we only moved him inside last year so he can learn how to use his hands instead of, having to come out from the edge, where if you're on the inside, you're using your hands right away.
Right.
And how do you battle the offensive lineman with hand movement? So he says that's something that he does with his young guys to get that experience. And then, so when you do go back on the outside, you have some experience with it to help you with that. Where if you're just going straight outside every single time and not getting that experience, well, maybe because he was always known as like a bull rush guy. And that was his move.
Well, if you listen to Von Miller, one of the benefits that he learned from a guy like DeMarcus Ware, for example, was the elevation of hand placement and technique. Von relied so heavily on the fact that he could almost bend and rush almost horizontally.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. It was insane. But he kind of always understood from DeMarcus that at some point your body won't be able to do that anymore. And if you wanted to succeed longer term in the league, you had to be more than a one-trick pony. You had to be, you had to have multiple tools on your tool belt in order to then last, past year 4 or 5. You had to be able to do the extra thing.
I mean, and you can dominate a lot of pass rushes just by hands alone. And that's why you see a lot of these guys that are edge rushers, do like jujitsu and stuff. So they are lethal with their hands. But yeah, I kind of just thinking of the Raiders, I think the Getsky thing and how he implements the talent there is certainly going to be interesting to watch. And I think it'll be a big indicator of just how bad Justin Fields is, because I think between AOC 12 and Minshew, I think they could put together a respectable offense passing game more than Fields can. So it's going to be interesting to see. And you saw what he got out of Kmet. So, you got 2 pretty good tight ends. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Kmet, I think he went 700 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
This year,
respectable.
Or last year.
He got a big contract. So.
And having 2 tight ends, yes, that's going to be a benefit. This is the best tight end room going way back to Dave Casper and Raymond Chester for the Raiders. I can't remember a tight end room that's going to be this talented.
Yeah. We just got to see if Bowers is not a Kyle Pitts, like obviously a freak athlete, but just can't figure it out. And maybe he will this year, but
yeah. And the interesting thing is also, see, I'm not willing to completely chalk it up to the tight ends that are on the Raiders and not being able to figure it out. I also think that you need to have an offensive coordinator that can piece the right guys in the right system.
Yeah.
I think that
McDaniels, how to use them.
Right. I think McDaniels is capable of doing that, but I think he needs to only focus on that. And this kind of goes back to, some of the general comments that are often made. Some dudes are just meant to be offensive coordinators. Like some guys are just really, really good at building offenses. And some guys, when they start to having the responsibility of acting like a team CEO, of being able to zoom in and zoom out and zoom in and zoom out and zoom in and zoom out, they're just not capable of it. And that's fine. And then other guys are so detail orientated that they can only ever get to a position coach and they can't get past it. Because they're not big picture enough to see outside of the individual like laser focused zone that they've specialized in. And I think that McDaniels is probably in that group.
Weapon of mass perception. That's great.
Yeah, that's right, Matt. That's so true. And we're going to see, Brock Bowers go all over the place. And, it's going to be interesting. Like, where does he line up? I just wonder, if it's like first, it's like, let's say third and goal on the 1. He's a big body guy. He's played halfback. Are you going to give it to him? Or are you going to go with Zeus? And just curiosity to see how that's going to translate.
Yeah.
Because I see Mayers as, again, the more traditional tight end, and Bowers, again, 12 personnel, coming out there and doing that second tight end. Or is he going to be slot? Or is he going to be, I can see him lining them out, wide even on certain plays, just depending on what it is. He's just a mismatch. But then again, it was back to all to the quarterback. Can the quarterback get him the ball? So we'll see.
Well, it's also about your scheme and design too.
True.
If your offensive coordinator can design a scheme that is
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex Smith, a question for you. Are you referring to the Broncos gaining ground on the Chiefs?
I'm assuming that's what he meant.
So just clarify that, and I will.
I just answered it.
I will jump in. Well, yes and no. We'll see. But it'll be very. I think the Raiders are a coin flip. I think you guys end up coming out the gate and can be an incredible team, or you guys can kind of come out flat because you're still trying to figure some stuff out. And I think that's a relatively fair and balanced assessment, which I'm sure every Raider fan in the chat hates me for saying out loud, but I think it's a pretty fair.
It is fair because, again, it's all about, I think the defense is going to be solid. And again, it's going to be, honestly, again, what I mentioned earlier, it's going to be Gillespie. How does he manage this team? Because again, overall, I just wasn't super impressed with the Bears. But again, the Bears just didn't have the same type of talent that the Raiders have this year. Bears just didn't have that last year. So it'll be fascinating to see, what they do. And it's going to be fascinating to see kind of like what since June 1st has come and gone. And now the Raiders are at $34 million in salary cap. They have some big questions that they need to answer. I mean, I think Raider Nation would really love to see someone like Xavier Howard to come over and take that number one, cornerback role. But at the same token, excuse me, you got some guys that are coming up on this is their last year. And you got a lot of defensive guys. So there's talk about, trying to extend guys like Robert Spillane, Nate Hobbs, Malcolm Kuntz, Morik, and Dion Diablo. So And you got only $34 million. You're not going to be able to extend all those guys and then try to sign a guy like Howard. So it's like, I feel like Telesco is being patient to kind of see what's going on. And I'm sure he's talking to all those guys, you know, reps and seeing what they'd be willing to go for. And I have a feeling they'll try to max it, you know, make it the same length as Max Crosby's contract. You know, kind of all end at the same time. Keep the unit together since the unit did improve so well. But that's kind of one of the things that, you know, on all the different Raider channels that I watch, that's been like the biggest conversation. What are we doing with that money? So I got a question for you guys. So my order from my team, again, for me, number one is Spillane to re-sign him. Number two is Hobbs at the slot corner. Number three was Kuntz. And the only reason why Kuntz is there, because, you know, he's the premium position. So, you know, if he hits it, he's going to get more money than, you know, extending him right now. But then again, I just got done talking about Tyree and how he potentially can change that. Again, you got a guy that can, you know, fill that position. And then after that, Morrig, which I think he's the only defensive / safety that PFF has rated in like the top 32 for, you know. And then last is Diablo. He's a linebacker, been hurt a lot. And so you got to weigh out those injuries with the play he had. And so that would be my order. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Or if you got a thought of it.
Diablo's a $2 or $3 mil a mil a year, a guy with some play and health escalators that is a reasonable position to take. I'd say $3 mil a year with an option to earn an extra 2 per season if he can actually keep his rear end on the field, and produce certain stats that put him within that price point. I think outside of that, $3 mil a year is a good bargain for a solid inside backer who is, you know, playing 60% of a season, for example, and can bring some veteran leadership and has some respect within the locker room. So I think that's reasonable for a team to bring in a guy like $3 mil a year who's kind of in his caliber. However, where I think you're better off spending your money is in your inside or interior D line to bolster it, because where the Raiders have not done, they haven't made consistent playoff runs. And I think what they would be well to do, and they started to do it last year and maybe again this year, is you need to pull a Philadelphia. You need to start getting guys that you can rotate in and out in the inside interior defensive line and find 2 guys that complement Max Crosby. You've already got one dude, like, you're good. You found you found the elite talent in a non-elite round. Good for you. You latch onto that guy and you make him a bit of a pedestal within your organization. And frankly, I think that he is a Raiders Raider in some regard in terms of the way that he plays the game.
Well, he does kind of, you know, remind me of Max. He's another player that doesn't leave the field. Right. And, you know, and he's a smack talker. So
right. That's he's a Raiders Raider, right? He's that guy, right? Like he's that dude. And that's awesome. Good for you. But I think you need another one to complement him. And not just complement, but you need an additional backfill or two that will allow you to keep a rotation going and not put yourself at a disadvantage. So many years now, you guys have not really had anyone to pair with Crosby who makes a big enough difference. If you get Crosby, who doesn't have to be the only guy on the field, and he has complementary help on the other side, or multiple guys that bolster him in the interior side of things.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Wow, are you in good shape?
Well, yeah, you got to think you got Butler, who comes in at DT, got 5 sacks this year. Kuntz got on the outside, got 8, and talked about Tyree earlier. I think, you know, he's going to be just a different player. You know, the one concern that I have on the defensive front, which he did great last year, was John Jenkins. But, you know, he's your first and second down nose tackle, but he's 35 years old. And his backup is a guy named McCoy, which I really don't know much about the kid at all. So I'd love that. Like, fucking third round in the draft, I would have taken Devontae Sweat.
Yep.
And got a young guy right there. And I think they kind of missed it by, taking Glaze, the tackle.
Yeah.
But hey, it's come and gone. You can't cry after spilt milk on that.
Yeah. But that's exactly kind of what my point is I think that the NFL on the defensive side is changing. So if I had to rank them, it would be your best interior guy that you think can be a great rotational player that you can kind of lock in for kind of that reasonable, like just steady contract.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think your slot corner, Hobbs.
Yeah, I got him number 2.
I have him as number 3. And the only reason why I have him as number 3 is because the stick that stirs the drink is the interior D-line. And
but there's not an interior D lineman that's coming up, except for Jenkins, who's on the 1-year deal, but he's 35. So I feel like they're going to end up replacing him next year at some point in the draft.
Right, and I think that's a mistake. I would
35. We'll see.
No.
They could re-sign him for another 1 year, and it may be the same type of deal. But again, he's 35.
You give him a 2-year deal.
Damn.
With not guaranteed. You give him a 2-year deal, but you give him a little bit of money up front. But then you double dip in the draft with one of the top interior dudes, and you make it part of the guy's contract that it's his job with the front-loaded money in his contract to basically coach on field like the young guy.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying at the 5 guys that I said I wanted to extend, you're saying John Jenkins is the guy that you would extend
number 2.
Over those guys. Number 2.
I have Hobbs as number 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would prioritize Spillane and Hobbs and figure out the rest after that.
And I think Jenkins getting that age too, where he's like, "Yeah, I'm 35." It's like I don't want to be moving around. I want to kind of stay put, and he's not going to be a big contract.
Spillane is just a Raider. He can't go anywhere else. I mean, that dude is a Raider.
Thank you, Alex. I agree with that.
I mean,
that's why he's my number 1.
Yeah. He's kind of like the backbone of the defense to some extent, I feel like.
The only reason
I think outsider watching it.
Jenkins used to be much better than he is now, and which means that he knows how to be better, but his body is not at a spot where he can actually elevate, right? Right. It's that's the thing, but he can teach a guy technique. So if you go and get a young dude with an older veteran that just kind of knows the ways of the world, if you will, and you pay him with that as an expectation, I think you're bound to get that extra bit out of a guy like Jenkins for putting him in that position, because a pro's pro, which I do believe Jenkins is, will see the guy that comes after him as his legacy. And I think that's for a legitimate professional football player, someone who has an appreciation for the game and all these other things. If you hear some of these professional football players, even ones that are not on TV regularly, but even on TV, bits and bobs, they all speak like that. They see the guy that came behind them for their main team. They see that guy's success as a reflection on them. And I think that's a big deal.
I think he definitely, performed very well this last year. But oh, that's funny.
Got it.
Got it. I don't know. I'm holding off on. I think Jenkins, you can re-sign him next year and give him another 1-year deal if they want him back. If they don't go out and draft him, I think that's just where he's at in his career at this point. I am a little nervous though, because I don't know who the McCoy kid is and what he can do, and having a pure nose tackle. Because really, there's only 2 pure nose tackles on the entire team. There's a lot of guys that can rotate in and out at the DT, but not at the nose tackle.
So, Alex, I'm going to throw over to you and talk about your Chiefs, and we'll go from there.
For sure. Really, I mean, I guess not too much news. They signed Xavier Worthy today. I had that pull. 4-year, $13.79 million. So I think he was the last pending rookie to sign his deal. So at least got that done. Visited the White House.
You visited the White House? Oh yeah.
I was pretty. No, not me. The Chiefs did.
No.
You know, I've been there, but yeah, I didn't do that. But yeah, really, there's no like too crazy information or news right now. The one interesting thing I think that recently came out is, the special teams coordinator talked about the new kickoff rule. They're considering using Justin Reed as the kickoff kicker, just because I think they said they looked at it and it was like the kicker was involved in 60% of the play on the return. So it's like, yeah, you don't really want Harrison Butker or some of these, 5'9", 160-pound kickers having to make a stop, because it usually doesn't go too well in my experience. So I think that'll be interesting, just because I didn't even think about that, when they came out with the new rule on kickoffs of that changing, that how they look at that as a kind of a position now. And, maybe teams start valuing these guys that can also kick on the side, just so they got an athlete out there if this, new style sticks. But yeah, really, nothing too crazy other than that. Some rookies, some of the defensive backs they selected have been getting high praise, but I feel like every team always is praising their rookies, at this stage of the offseason,
everyone looks like all pro.
Bad. Yeah, unless it's blatantly bad, then they just kind of act like they're not there. But yeah, I mean, so other than that, it's just kind of all full steam ahead, waiting to see what happens with this Rashee Rice situation. Bugs, the guy we talked about last week, turned himself in on his warrant, so he's dealing with that. I imagine he'll probably get cut because he was a future reserve contract guy anyways. So I don't envision him sticking around for all that much longer. So yeah, really, nothing too crazy other than that. Just seeing kind of which young guys kind of rise to the top and take over some of these roster holes that I kind of pointed out last week, because doesn't look like they're really re-signing anyone and letting kind of this younger core of UDFAs and practice squad guys they've kind of kept around, get a shot at those lower tier roles on the 53. So,
and you brought up a really good point there, Alex, on this new kickoff rule. I mean, it's going to bring a whole different dynamics to the game. And just to see how the formations are going to be, what type of players are you going to use now that it was totally different, under the old type of rule. What are you going to put out there? Because now you're only 10 yards. Build up that steam to get down there. So are you throwing more offensive linemen, out there, on the kick returns, and, or even like, even could be even smaller, faster guys, on the kickoffs themselves, because again, you're going to be going against these big dudes, which you want to get around real quick. So it's going to be super interesting to kind of see how that dynamic plays out and how it's going to change and what type of guys you're going to put out there and so forth. But it really did bring back the kick returners, though.
Yeah, it's going to be sweet. I think we might get back to kind of that Devin Hester, Dante Hall type era, where some teams had like game-changing kick returners. But yeah, I did kind of overquote the percentage because I just pulled it up. But so the special teams coordinator said he watched every play, every kickoff in the XFL, and the kicker was involved in 25 to 40% of the tackles. So with that, that's why they're giving Justin Reed opportunities to work as the kicker on those, kickoffs. because I've personally seen a kicker try to make a tackle and it doesn't never goes well.
No. No. But we did talk about that in earlier shows, though, where we think that we're going to start seeing, at least I do, linebackers making the back end of the roster. You're going to start seeing an additional safety probably make the back end of these rosters now.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that you have the potential in some of the more bolder teams, maybe if they have a more athletic guy who's a real big body, and you might even get some like defensive ends making that kind of back end developmental side of the roster where, they like the upside, but the dude can play special teams. And I just think that they're going to want a guy that can both block and tackle. And I think you're going to largely get that from kind of the defensive side of the ball more than the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a tight end might be an exception to the rule just because they're normally asked to do just about everything. But
they're normally your special teamers,
Yeah, they are. And they're used to being put on special teams.
Because they're just big athletes.
Yeah, they're just big dudes that are athletic, right? They're like, I am super big and I am super strong and I can hit
and I run
guys.
a 4.4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that you're going to start seeing more of those types of dudes. DZ, check your Twitter DM. And so I just think you're going to see more of those types of guys that are going to come up and bubble up through rosters. I also think you're going to see guys like your rugby star that you got on your team, Alex, which are.
I think they were giving him chances to do the kicking too, like work in.
Well, you do realize that I bet you that guy's a damn good kicker, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
No, but and I'm being serious because the one thing that separates Aussie rules from other rugby, and this is me kind of like geeking out about the sport that I actually know.
Quick segue to rugby.
Yeah.
Welcome to Wawa Rugby.
Yeah. Quick left turn. Quick left turn here.
Ahoy.
Yes. The one thing about Aussie rules versus British rules, so your traditional rugby that you see on TV for the most part is going to be British rules rugby, which is kind of slower pace, but like just really grinding and brutal when you watch it on film. It's pretty rough. Not going to lie. But when you see the fast, quick paced, zipping all around, that's Aussie rules football. And you'll notice that they do what are called knockdowns, where they drop the ball on the ground vertically, and then they kick it downfield, and then they all run towards it. Now, there's a lot more running in Aussie rules football, so they're typically slimmer, like in terms of just build. They're not like the big, thick, burly guys. They're kind of more, Zamet style in terms of slim and quick, but obviously athletic and tough. And there's a lot more running involved. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, they can all kick.
Yeah.
So I actually think that that's a really interesting mix and blend in today's NFL with these new rules, which is, well, wait a minute, if I can get this dude as like a,
and with the international player
slot,
if
I can get this guy as a free player on my roster who can be a backup kicker, a kick punt returner, and a running back and a wide receiver, because that's basically rugby in a nutshell. And he's actually NFL caliber as an athlete and as a player. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like all they have to do is know where to place it. You don't want to kick it long. No one wants to kick in the end zone. That's gone away. They want those returns.
Right. Yeah. But that's what makes rugby different. The goal of rugby kicks are never to kick it out of bounds, never to kick it directly out of bounds. It's all about placement and where it goes.
Which is what you want on this kickoff.
Even some rando dude on some back end team that's like, worst in the league, when they play Aussie rules, that's what they do. Like, they might suck on the rugby pitch by not tackling or anything, but for the most part, when they play Aussie rules, they can knock down a kick and get it within, plus or minus a few yards of where they were aiming.
Basically, what you're saying is they're the perfect kicker for this new kickoff. That's what it sounds like.
Yes. Not only that, I actually think that
That's what I was hearing too.
Assuming they're not a bunch of Bacchiuses, but
yes, no, but I think what you get from a guy like that is just a unique offensive weapon or special teams weapon, which you typically wouldn't have needed or wouldn't have been able to afford in previous years in the NFL, given the way the rules were.
Hey, Raph.
yeah, I did want to. Let me find this. Someone asked a good question, or I wanted to answer it or talk about it. Curious for your guys' thoughts too. Yeah, so I mean, I don't think the Chiefs are any worse than they were last year, and I think they might actually be a little bit better because they now have legit deep threats that they haven't had in the offense for a couple years. And I'm not overly concerned with the loss of Snead because of McDuffie. And I think that, they're given the GM's track record of finding, starting caliber corners in the later rounds of the draft. I think they have enough there to make up for losing McDuffie as your primary slot guy. Because I think McDuffie has what it takes to be the same type of player that Snead was. And I think the bigger question is, who can make up for McDuffie, being the Robin in the slot and doing it at a first team all pro level.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Alex. It's like it's a big loss, and his shoes are going to be hard to fill. But I do agree. I just think your team is deep, but getting wide receivers that hold on to the ball it's monumental for your team. And even with that, you guys still won a Super Bowl, so it's like
I think it's tough to count them out at this point, unless Patrick Mahomes is not healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other thing to remember is that the league is changing slightly as well, where slot corners need to be bigger now than they have been in the past. So it's a changing and an evolving position. So you're used to, those quick, shifty guys.
They're just physical enough.
Yeah.
I mean, McDuffie's not that big. He's like 5'10".
Right. But that's what I'm saying is that McDuffie is a great option kind of on the outside, who's quick, shifty, can keep up, can run backwards as fast as he can run forwards kind of thing. And that's what you want for that outside spot, right? But what you're getting now when you have to start facing...
get out of here.
But what you're getting now with these the new teams and the new way of doing things is you're getting running backs catching over the middle of the field who are, 6 foot and 225, or you're getting a Travis Kelce style tight end who is 6'4" and 245 kind of thing. Well, that's a different breed. You want a guy who is able to match. Maybe not match directly, but at least come closer to matching that from a height and size perspective in order to stop someone of that size and ilk. And if you don't have a bigger dude in that slot spot that can actually do those things, I think you're going to be, in a tough spot. And I think the Broncos saw that with a few of our guys, one of them going over to the Chargers. And then we had, after he moved on to Chris Harris Jr., who was a smaller, fast guy who was amazing in the slot. But at the end of the day, I think the game started to get more challenging for someone of his size and skill set, just because, tight ends were just becoming so quick and large in that middle part of the field that, a smaller dude just couldn't keep up anymore. The Wes Welkers were gone at that point. Like those were not the norm at that stage as Chris Harris Jr. got to the end of his career.
Well, and look at it in the way of like the new rule coming out this year. You can't, drop your weight. So when you got guys, like a Kelce, a big dude, and you got these running backs that are going out, and you how are you going to tackle if you're like 5'10", 180 pounds, you're going against 6'4", 245, and you can't drop your weight? Well, good luck.
Yeah, for real. It's going to be nearly impossible without getting a targeting call.
The only thing that I hope that they don't get rid of next is what I call the Velociraptor tackle. And so what that would mean is I would want a slot corner to grab a guy by the legs. And then as the guy's going down, I want the linebacker to come from behind and basically break him in half.
You want those Hollywood movie tackles.
No, I want what I did in rugby in the NFL. Like for real.
Yeah. I don't think that'll ever happen.
Yeah, the league's going away from that type of stuff. We've got to go back to the 70s.
I know, I don't like it. But I believe that you're playing a contact sport and you're getting paid millions of dollars to do so. Part of your job is to entertain. And I want to know if your body can handle it.
It just seems like every year it's getting more difficult to tackle or play defense. It's all driven one side.
1 point scored. I mean, it's just that you can see it almost every year. They find ways to make it easier to score points.
Cowtown, I'm going to pull this comment up because I've actually been thinking about this for a while now. I agree. No, seriously, think about it. What would that do to the game of football? Keep the helmet, but ditch the exoskeleton over the shoulders. I'm not saying I'm not saying get rid of the chest protection. I'm saying keep the chest protection, but get rid of the armadillo armor that's over the shoulders with the hard plastic and stuff, right? And what would that do to player safety?
I don't know.
That's a good question. You probably know best, Richie, since you're a rugby guy.
Right. And so you got a few crazy dudes that are like me, that are willing to do the thing at full speed and take the abuse and say, that's why I'm getting paid what I'm getting paid. And so be it. I think Max Crosby would certainly be one of those guys too. I'm just, again, pointing to your Raiders as an example of someone that I think it kind of fits that mold. Derek Wolfe from my Denver Broncos would be another guy that I think would be like, yeah. But I think you have a whole other group of guys in the NFL that would curb these, really aggressive hits that you're seeing that hurt guys because they wouldn't go at full speed.
Wait a minute. You just said you want to see those aggressive, dominating, knock them out type hits. But if you're going to then say you want to take that away, it's like,
no, it's part of it is because you have the exoskeleton that's hitting the other guy. So, for example, if I'm willing to take my actual my actual shoulder and put it in your actual jaw and watch it get dislocated, I'm cool with that. However, what I don't like happen is what we're seeing now is where you have guys that are basically wearing full-on body armor and they're just running around like they're invincible and they're just slogging people because they don't feel it because they're basically wearing this like 5-inch plastic all over their body. I think it's the plastic exoskeleton that's actually responsible for a good number of the injuries that we're seeing at the NFL level. Because even though rugby is a very violent sport, don't get me wrong, very much is, 100%, not saying it's not, but you typically don't get the same style of injuries that you get at the NFL level because most guys, not saying most, but a good number of them, are not willing to make the same types of hits that you see the NFL guys make at the speeds that they're making it at the NFL level.
Definitely would be hitting different, that's for sure. But I miss the guys like Jack Tatum and the way he would hit, or Steve Atwater, that type of contact.
Right, but my point is that I hit guys in rugby like Atwater did without pads. And that's what makes someone unique or different is that they don't care.
Well, I get that if you don't care, but what is the life? Let me ask you this because I don't know the answer. So, what is the lifespan of playing without pads versus with pads? What's the longevity of your career?
Depends on the position. and depends on caliber in the league, but you typically get the top tier guys. They're able to last a good 10 years.
But I guess my thing is, though, you just said, also with getting rid of the exoskeleton, then, some percentage of guys are not willing to make the same types of hits as they would, therefore safer collisions. But, as Cowtown said, like, we watch the NFL for the collisions, and they, play at a faster, more reckless pace because of the protection, so I think just as a whole, there's no way to ever get around, not
but
having
you're missing
the
what
high
I'm saying.
impact.
You're missing what I'm saying. You could bring back a good percentage of the types of hits that they no longer allow. Now, I'm not saying they're ever going to bring back helmet to helmet or something like that. Like that I kind of agree with, sort of.
Yeah.
But like you're going to start being able to allow the hip drop tackle again. You're going to start to being able to allow crossing hits over the middle of the field again, where you're not going to get this insanity where, a guy that's like 6'4" that runs like a 4.7 is going to be able to just gallivant across the middle of the field, catch the ball with immunity, basically, and be like, watch me go for 10 yards. Like, you're going to then have a safety that is going to be completely willing to just line a dude up and rock him.
Can you imagine if Derrick Henry's come, running the ball and you don't have shoulder pads on and you can't do a drop tackle and you got no armor? You might as well say, okay, bye-bye, go right by.
That's what I'm saying is that if you alter things, you're going to get guys that aren't going to try to go in for like the enormous, massive hit. But you're also going to avoid the running backs like Henry, who will often drop his plastic shoulder that is basically covered to plastic like 3/4 of the way down his darn arm and drop a shoulder into a guy because he's going to be hitting a guy with his raw, like exposed shoulder to then try to make that hit. And now you end up with a little bit more of a balance. Now, Henry is an enormous human being. I am not arguing that at all. The dude is a defensive end that has pretended that he's a running back for like 8 years in the NFL. Okay. Like the guy is mammoth. However, what you will get is a linebacker, especially a younger linebacker, who's got the health on his side, who's 6'5" and 250. I'm talking about bringing back guys like Urlacher, Ray Lewis, that style of player, because they're going to be able to line guys up, play with reckless abandon, because they both don't have pads on, and you're going to have the tough guy coming back to the NFL. And wouldn't that be awesome to watch?
Well, I guess let me ask you this. So the NFL has gone away from, having those real big linebackers. Now these guys are like 6'2", 230, 235, somewhere in there. And it's become more of a passing league. So you got to have these guys who go more sideline to sideline. I don't know if they would bring that back, even again, if they didn't have pads, because it's still going to be a passing league and you got to be able to cover. So
yep, safeties will do it. Like, imagine a Keenan Allen without shoulder pads on, who's no longer protected in his upper body,
spike,
who then gets a dude who's 6'1" and 205, who's willing to line him up in the midsection and take him out and knock him clear off his feet.
So then, are we saying then, like, all the smaller players, they're going to be kind of further like depleted or gone? Because again, you're going to need to have. I mean, with all the NFL teams want big dudes. That's just the way it is. But then we're going to say we're going to get rid of even more of the smaller guys. They're bringing the bigger, heavier guys in a passing league with no pads.
Yes. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that will bring back heavier, harder hitting. I think that'll bring back a style of league that football fans miss. Like, let's go back and look at the football from 20 years ago, even 30 years ago. You had those types of dudes playing those positions. And you would be able to bring back those types of hits. Now, maybe they're not running at the same speed because they like both players, both the offense and the defensive guy are going to want to like protect themselves a little bit. Because, I mean, a hit hurts. I don't care who you are. But you're going to start to be able to bring back some of those open field, just bludgeoning style hits because you're not dealing with plastic against bone or plastic against exposed, sections of the body, which is what is ultimately like, that's what they're trying to protect against, right? Like, so here's another example: ACL tears, MCL tears, et cetera, et cetera. What is often happening with these ACL and MCL tears? A lot of it is because they've taken this upper section of the hitting out of the game and they're forcing guys to go down to the weaker joints, which are the knees and kind of ankles of players in terms of bringing them down to the ground. Well, you're going to inevitably, just because you're going after the weak spots in the body, let's just be real. It's not like your knees are the strongest part of your whole body when you're standing upright as a football player is built like a tank. You're then forcing these guys to hit the weakest spots of their opponent's body. So yeah, you're going to have injuries. Yes, you're going to have soft tissue tears. It's just a fact of life, and you're seeing that play out in real time before our eyes. Now, on the flip side of that, because we've seen so many MCL and ACL tears, these doctors are getting so bloody good at fixing them that these guys are coming back like the next year and playing super well. So there's been some positives that have come out of the injuries here as well. Don't get me, like, I'm not saying it's all bad, but the technology to fix them now is already here. So let's actually do something to protect the players, and let's start looking at maybe a hybrid approach to the game as opposed to start saying slap more plastic on it and we'll make everything better.
I think it's kind of changed. I think some of the pads when I used to play, I mean, you don't see as many guys wear knee pads as like, my generation, tailbone pads, that type of stuff. I think that's kind of gone away. They're looking for more speed.
The shoulder pads really aren't that big.
Not anymore.
It's not like the 80s when you look at like the Bo Jackson and Brian Bosworth, those things were enormous.
Yeah, I mean, every game, my whole arms would be just bruised.
Yeah,
I definitely didn't have any coverage there.
But I just think that I think you could do some interesting things by limiting the plastic, and then by opening up. Like, I think it would be an interesting experiment, at least, like for like an XFL or something like that, to say, what would the game look like with a different balance between plastic on the body versus opening up more aggressive hits and making the game look maybe a little bit more like yesteryear, because we might have less injuries as a result of those changes. I'm not saying that it would last forever. I'm not saying it'd be great, but I think it would be a really interesting look on the field to kind of bring back like those Atwater style hits, like where a wide receiver could run across the middle, and that was never a smart move.
So Richie, how about this? Since you're a Canadian, how about like hockey pads then? That's a lot smaller.
Those were baseball bat fun for me.
Well, there you go.
No, I'm serious. Like, so as a rugby player, because I was used to hitting guys at full speed without anything, I used to laugh at the hockey players because they were like, oh, I hit a guy and it was great. And it's like, dude, you're wearing an exoskeleton. You're a pansy. And the guy's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, here, where's your hockey pads? So I threw like a hockey pads on, and I'd have dudes swing baseball bats on me because like I was used to literally like nothing. Right. And so like that's the difference, in my opinion, between like a hockey player and a football player. And when you get into like a contact sport that has no, like zero padding, but you're still expected to hit people hard, is you build up calluses. Like, Shannon Sharp says it all the time, that ask me a dude who's been out of league 3 years, they would never go back on the field. They're like, the calluses are gone. Like those, the body is used to absorbing those hits. You just can't come back to the game the same way after 3 or 4 years. You just can't do it. And I've yet to see anyone who has been able to.
Well, we know what would happen if Richie's the commissioner of the NFL. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
segue to rugby.
No, I love those like old school like Rock'em Sock'em NHL videos where the dudes just like blasted a guy over the middle of the field. I love the football players of old that were, where it was a business decision whether or not you caught the ball by turning your head in the middle of the field. That really set the tone for the opponent on the defensive side and the offense on whether or not you had a guy that was willing to put themselves in that spot. And to me now, it's like it's almost an automatic catch as long as the guy doesn't have a guy right on him in the middle of the field. Like there is no possibility that the dude is dropping that pass, right? Like, and even then, if the guy doesn't turn around, you can't even hit him because they call that a defenseless player. So you don't even get tackles like that anymore in the NFL. So I think it's a really tough issue. I think the NFL could do well by finding a way of bringing back the cost of doing business, for lack of better words, of those middle of the field stuff. I think guys like Kelsey would do fine. I think guys like, some of these other big deal tight ends would do just fine. So I don't think you see a huge change there, but I think you see a lot of these lighter, lanky wide receivers that think they can do the whole middle of the field dirty business stuff. They would go away right quick. They could, their bodies can't take it. And that's just, we've seen that play out with Wes Welker, with who's the other guy? Amendola,
all the little ones,
all the kind of 5'8", 5'9" small dudes. Their bodies just couldn't take it. And Jack, to your point with what I'm saying and proposing, my answer is yes. Like, yes. I mean, a 5'9", 180-pound corner or something like that, while they can be interesting in today's NFL due to the rules, are not the most interesting players for me to watch. They're just not. I want to watch the, 6'4" dude that can run a 4.5 come up and clock a dude and take him clear off his feet and then watch him go to the turf. I'm thinking like a Ray Lewis or Brian Urlacher style player, as opposed to these tweeners that you're having in the linebacker spot now. Like you saw some, like go back and watch those old school linebackers play. That was fun football to watch as a fan. It just was. Like, I'm sorry, it just was.
And, it's also the mentality of each individual player, because as soon as we talked about, okay, if you're like 5'10", we just talked about an excellent, defensive back. And then I think of like, one of the hardest hitters in the Raiders history is Jack Tatum. He was only like 5'10", 5'11". So it's the mentality of the individual, because I can see a Tatum filling in just fine for what you're talking about. And I think he would totally have that same mindset. Let's just do it.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. I think you can end up with a balance between player safety, as odd as it sounds, with what I'm suggesting, and a bit of a return to old by allowing some of these hits and styles of play that have been removed from the game. Just kind of my 2 cents.
I think what you should do, Richie. I think you should create your own league and make that happen.
Yeah, call it Richie's League. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll call it the Crazy Canucks, and we'll go from there.
Crazy Canucks.
But I'm going to go into my Denver Broncos. I think we've had some interesting stuff occur over the past week and change. I do want to throw out a couple comments here. I've had a few kind of Denver Broncos stuff. Alex Smith, I want to thank you for joining the show. A couple comments made earlier about Bo Nix and Russell Wilson. I am just trying to pull that up here. If you can best bear with me. I'm not sure if it's still there. Yeah, here it is. So, Alex, again, thank you for joining the show. Do I see Bo Nix, not no Nix, Bo Nix, who, in fairness to Alex, he did correct himself. So
Yeah, no.
it is what it is. But do I see Bo Nix as an upgrade over Russell Wilson? Short answer, and again, to stay consistent, that's yet to be seen. Bo Nix has not been on an NFL field yet. I would certainly say, based on the feedback from training camp and mini camp, that as long as you think that they're being truthful and not just kind of lying because he's a first-round draft pick, that Bo Nix is certainly processing faster than Russell Wilson did on the practice field, which is consistent with what you saw from him in college, right? Like, that's just, he was a processor on the field and was able to kind of make throws and passes. So I think that's a fair kind of approach there. Question is whether or not he can carry that onto an NFL football field when you have live bullets coming at you, and the like. We will wait and see what happens. Now, in terms of how I feel about Russell Wilson, which is a previous comment made earlier, fortunately it has passed us by, being the starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If that's a risk they're willing to take, then go for it.
Well, it's not that much of a risk for the Steelers. I mean, you look at it. I mean, because it only cost them $1.8 million, and then the Broncos were paying the rest of that contract. So, if he sucks like he did with the Broncos, if you want to go move on to Fields, it's easy to do. I mean, there's a lot of players that are getting paid more than he is. I didn't wonder. I'm curious. I'll have to go look it up. I wonder where he ranks. In the way of his 1.8 million versus everybody else on the team. Where does he fall on the scale of the 53-man roster?
It's got to be down there.
Yeah,
I think the vet minimum is like 1.3. So
yeah, but
like,
my comment isn't based on his salary. My comment is based on the skill on the field. And so the point is that it was a low risk move for them to bring him in. And I think it makes sense for them to bring him in. The question is, how long of a leash are they willing to give him?
That's a great question. They have to find out after preseason.
I think it's half a season. I think whoever wins, if it is a competition, gets half of their season to keep it, because they both only have a year. So I mean, I don't think they took it without the intention of, quickly moving on to the other.
Yeah, but see, the difference between, say, a Russell Wilson and, say, a Fields.
Yeah, I mean, two different types of QBs.
Is you're talking at different trajectories. Fields still has the potential of coming up on an upswing. Russell Wilson, by all accounts, has hit his upswing and he's on the way down.
Yeah.
So the question is, can you curb the downward vertical to a plateau, or is he just going to continue down the vertical slope, down the slippery slope, and find his way in a golf course? Right.
And this is a great question. I wish your friend that was a Steelers fan would have been on, because exactly for what you just said, and exactly what Alex just said, they only have 1-year deals. So you got to figure both these guys out going into the next year.
And I think they have no problem just, getting rid. I think they'd rather re-sign Fields if they could. So I think that's why I think it's, if Wilson doesn't win it during the preseason, I don't think they have a problem cutting him.
No.
I just like to see him be a backup and have to sit there on the bench, and then, watching a football game, him sitting on the bench with the, being all sad. Fields took over that job.
Yeah. But shifting to the Broncos, Richie, I'm seeing reports that Zach Wilson, the other Wilson, is QB1 right now.
Yep. So I think if
he's
you
like,
recall,
damn it. That's why I was trying to talk about the Steelers.
Yeah, but if yes, but if you recall, I was actually hoping that was going to be the outcome.
Really?
Yes. And I'm not even joking. Like I'm on tape like I can't lie about it now. Like I'm on tape saying.
Everyone
exactly
remember
that.
this. Richie wants Zach Wilson.
So I actually think Bo Nix is going to be the eventual starter. But I'd like to see Bo Nix sit in behind Stidham and Wilson and learn the ebbs and flows of the game, and perhaps come in from time to time near the end of games where the Broncos are maybe ahead in some games, or where they're so far behind that they're looking for a spark of some kind, and they don't believe that the current starter is pulling their weight. But I think that Bo Nix needs to be put in where there's no expectations. I think Bo Nix needs to be put in where he can certainly just learn the game at the NFL speed and at the NFL level. And that is, I think, where he's going to do his best. I am very much looking to that guy's team right over there in terms of what they did with Patrick Mahomes as a reasonable blueprint to follow, which is unlike a lot of other Broncos fans out there, I am not calling for a 13-win season or something stupid like that. I think that there's a bunch of winnable games in our schedule. I think we do have, about the same or similar record to what we had last season. But I also think that in the NFL, picking in the top 15 with an 8-9 record, which is effectively what the old 8-8 used to be, right? The Jason Garrett special. Coach Clapp, for those of you who don't know who that is, with the Cowboys there. His record average, I think, was 8-8 as a season. Like it's like he was like right down the middle, like nothing great, nothing awful, just like right down the middle. And I think that's kind of the way forward. Alex, I got a question for you. Alex Smith, that is.
Yeah, I figured.
How many teams have had their starting quarterback being thrown right into the fire in year one? Remember my comment there, year one. And had them turn out and go on to be successful teams and or win the Super Bowl?
I mean, Houston did pretty good last year.
Did they win the Super Bowl?
I don't think a rookie has ever done it.
They went from Houston being Houston to
Look,
the playoffs.
I am certainly not going to sit there and say, wow, CJ Stroud sucked last year. Not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is if you go back through the history of the league, including who is arguably the best quarterback in the NFL by a mile at this point right now, I think is a fair comment to make as well, with Patrick Mahomes. Even with Patrick Mahomes being brought into this fold with all of his success that he has had in the NFL so far, I don't believe there is a single rookie that has gone on to win a Super Bowl, with the exception of Peyton Manning.
Wait a minute.
And maybe a John Elway who started week one, I think.
I don't think anyone's
ever done it.
No, I'm even talking in their career though. The point is that most dudes that start week one struggle pretty heavy, and then a good percentage of those guys get so beat up mentally that they can't overcome it as they get later in their career, where they otherwise ought to be able to overcome that. So Peyton Manning sucked in his first year, but he was mentally strong and ended up going on to win 2 Super Bowls, right?
Yeah.
So he's a rare air example. Like he's a rare air example of a dude that sucked, and that by all metrics, and even he will admit it in his rookie season if you've heard him in his interviews. But he went on to do quite well during over the course of his career, right? So fair enough.
But it's a little different story for your Broncos. It's like I look at kind of Stiddy. If you're going to start someone, I don't think it's going to be Zach Wilson. He just showed me that
he sucks.
He's not very good. I mean, you look at the Jets. I mean, they got 2 rookies of the year. They got, one in Garrett Wilson and one in Sauce Gardner. They had a great defensive line. Yes, their offensive line was garbage. That's why Aaron Rodgers got hurt. And then you look at Fields. Well, Fields, after you traded Watson and you got 3 first-round draft picks. I mean, and they built up the roster with that. And then he comes in. You got a lot of good guys that are out there. And I will say this for your Broncos. It's just based on the Russell Wilson trade and getting your head coach. You guys gave up a lot of draft picks, which you haven't been able to replenish those draft picks. And so you just don't have all the guys in place around them like Houston does. Houston is like a great example. If you put all the guys in place,
they're continuing to build,
So I think Stiddy would be a great, I think he should be your starter to stop it. And I liked Stiddy when he came out and played for the Raiders. I think he did okay.
Wilson statistically, and I'm talking pure stats at this point, not objectively looking at play on the field, has had some years where he's had at least yards and some other stats, which are,
I mean, he could throw it.
Yeah, which are interesting. And so then the question is, well, if he's able to throw the ball around the field like that with an absolute trash offensive line, and by the way, Jack, all of the players that you mentioned that were good on the Jets are on the defensive side. So
Garrett Wilson's a wide receiver.
Well, I mean, Garrett, but I'm talking like the best of their players.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, no doubt.
Call a duck, right?
Yep.
So,
oh man.
So you need to look at who the best players are, realistically speaking. You got one great wideout on the Jets, and then you got an offensive line that couldn't block their way out of a wet paper bag. Right?
So true.
And then you got a quarterback who, like, they literally got their quarterback killed. Like, he's he might have died and then brought back to life.
He might be done.
And he might not be able to make it back as a result of that offensive line. And that's coming from a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who the year prior, if I'm not mistaken, was in contention for league MVP.
Yeah. I think it won it 2 years.
If not won it.
Yeah.
Right. So like, that's the problem, right? Is you're looking at a dude that's clearly up here and then goes to the Jets. And even when he was with the Jets, he looked pretty good. But then you basically just got shown exactly what a bad offensive line can do for a good to great quarterback.
Well, yeah, when you're a Hall of Fame quarterback and you last 4 snaps in your first game and out for the season, that just tells you something about your offensive line.
Right. And so my point being is that with Wilson coming from that as his team, and he's still able to throw.
And Hackett.
Yeah, and Hackett as a coordinator.
And Hackett as the savior to the bad coordinator that he had before that.
Right. So I actually think that you're probably dealing with a quarterback who's probably better than you think. In my opinion, I think he's better than you think. And I also, and I think you need to look no further than Russell Wilson actually to prove that as a general statement. Russell Wilson with the Denver Broncos the year prior was awful. And I mean awful. Like, he was awful across the board. And then you had Sean Payton come in, who installs a very quarterback-friendly system, plays to his quarterback's strengths, and basically made Russell Wilson look like he could have actually played in the NFL as a starter. And
I will say one thing is for sure is, whichever one they do start, whether it be Nix or Wilson, this will, ultimately prove if Sean Payton is, an offensive quarterback guru. And I think both of them have very similar traits to QBs that he's been successful with before. So it'll be interesting to watch. He basically has like kind of 2 options of the same car,
Yeah.
And so see if he goes to the one with a little more bells and whistles or what.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And so my hope is that the Broncos avoid the temptation, and there is one, to throw Bo Nix right into the fire. I think that you put out Wilson, I believe, over Stidham. That's just my gut reaction.
Yeah, I mean, Nix is who I was talking about.
Yeah, Nix. Well, no,
Nix
I think
Wilson.
Nix or Wilson, I
Stidham's
think, are very
irrelevant.
similar. I think Nix and Wilson are quite similar in terms of
Yeah.
players. I think Stidham
That's
is
what I was saying. Nix
yeah.
and Wilson are kind
Yeah.
of like the same
Yeah.
same
Whereas
traits.
Stidham is a little bit different. Stidham is a kind of a taller, more cerebral type guy who may well fit very well into Sean Payton's offense just because there's so much verbiage and whatnot that goes on within it. But I just think that you're better off starting Wilson, keeping Stidham as a third option or on the practice squad or some variation of that if you can, because I think eventually one of them will get cut. I think eventually you're going to pick between Wilson and Stidham, and I think that'll be an interesting choice. But I think Wilson just has more upside.
What type of contract did Wilson get?
I think it's just the rest of his.
They just picked up the rest of his rookie deal.
I think it's just this year.
Stiddy was what? 2 years, 10 million, so 5 per.
This is the end of his contract.
He probably has no money guaranteed or anything left.
No.
So, yeah. I think you're probably right. I mean, it's probably those two battling because I mean, Nix is obviously staying, but I part of me is more of the like I would rather just put Nix out there and see what you got, and if it's not like see if you get flashes of success, and maybe hopefully get a higher draft pick and can rebuild at a quicker rate, kind of like how Houston did it more by trading picks, but I mean, they found what they had in Stroud and still were picking in the top 10, despite being a playoff team. And, so they're rebuilding in a quicker way than it would be if, you go 8 and 9 and are picking 15.
Yeah. So what the Broncos should have done if they wanted to go the Texans route is they should have traded guys like Cortland Sutton. They should have traded guys like Garrett Bowles. They should have traded what? Surtain. Yeah.
Yeah.
They should have picked key cogs that they could have really bolstered draft picks with. And then gone into this year with a very deep draft in key and core positions like the tackles and whatnot, re-upped their roster with younger guys that were savvy and capable, and then also worked into one of those deals where they got what they think is going to be a reasonable or at least decent first round draft pick next year if you can, to add on to your existing first round draft pick. And then you end up with kind of this real bolstering of your roster within a 2-year window, and then you're all of a sudden competitive as long as you draft well.
Well, next year you're going to have a full complement of picks. So all those trades that that have already happened. Sorry, it's hot out here, guys. it's triple digits for sure. But I think next year is going to be the telling tale, because again you've been short, and your coach can only do so much with the limited resources and the cap hit that's hit. So once Russell Wilson's cap hit's gone, you get a full complement of players. Then we're going to see how the Broncos change the organization around. So you're kind of behind the 8 ball right now, but once that happens, then you're going to have a boatload of cap to spend, and you can bring in guys if you want to bring them in too.
Yeah, so we have a fair amount of cap that's going to be opening up for us next year as a result of what we've done this year with Russell Wilson's contract. And so
yeah.
I do agree that next year is going to be a real, actually the more interesting season for the Broncos to see what we do, especially off-season wise. But I still think that if you're truly trying to be competitive and want to be competitive, I think that you're better off, because Miami did it, the Texans did it. You've seen blueprints of teams do it the right way, which is go and draft well, develop well, get a good coach, and then you can kind of go from not competitive to competitive in maybe 2 years. And that's what the Texans did. That's what the Dolphins did. And I'm sure there's other teams that I'm forgetting right now just off the top of my head. But I mean, in recency bias, if we're going to kind of pick 2 teams, I would say both of those teams are certainly, within that mold.
What I was trying to say too, though, is you look at other teams like Bengals and Bills, even that had quicker rebuilds because they figured out they had the guy by just putting him out there. So there's like kind of a catch-22 with going that route too.
Yeah, but I'm looking at it from a longevity perspective.
True.
Joe Burrow has been hurt and has never won a Super Bowl.
He got there,
Josh
though.
Allen has never. He's looked good in fits and spurts and in blocks of the season where it's almost undeniable that he's a gifted football player. Problem is, he kind of almost can't get out of his own way, and it's clear that he requires like legitimate coaching to get out of his own way.
Yeah. But realistically, in the last 6-7 years, there's really only been 2 QBs to win a Super Bowl. So, I don't know if the Super Bowl is necessarily the ultimate measuring stick of finding your guy, and then determine how then figuring out where your window is to build your most competitive roster.
No, but I'd even argue the 49ers have done a better job in that regard. Like, they got their dude in like the late rounds, and he's already been into the deeper sections of the playoffs.
Boy, can you imagine though what the 49ers never made a Trey Lance trade and having those 3 first-round picks?
I know, it's ridiculous.
No, but that's what I'm saying though, right? It's almost like RG3 and Kirk Cousins in terms of what the Commanders or the now Commanders or Washington football team kind of did, right? Which is
Commanders.
First-round pick and a 4th-round pick.
Yeah, like the QB that was better out of both of them is clearly Cousins. Sorry, not sorry.
Well, yeah, look who's still playing, and look.
Yeah, exactly.
An analyst,
and one of them's an analyst just doing random hot takes just to get a name for himself, right? And so, like the difference between those
RG3 did have a hell of a rookie year.
He did, and Cousins he knows how to work the NFL better than any other person in the league. Yeah. That guy gets paid and paid and paid.
Right.
I'm convinced Cousins just like the typical white suburban guy that just is like no one could everyone's just like, what the fuck just happened? Like, what he just look at that guy. He's just like, hey, thanks guys, pleasure doing business. They're like, yeah, what did we just do?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cousins would be like, you know what? Go ahead, Atlanta, cut me. I'll take my guaranteed money and I'll sign another $140 million contract somewhere else.
Yeah.
Seriously.
But that's exactly kind of what I'm getting at, right? Which is if you truly look at what works in the NFL, and I think it's important to kind of look at what works and what you have seen work, is throwing a rookie right into the fire typically does not get you deep into the playoffs, generally speaking. It doesn't, and it most definitely by all accounts does not win you a Super Bowl. So you're better off letting your guy develop even for just a year or for most of a year, and you let them kind of understand the game with a little bit of a deeper knowledge, with a little bit more depth to each thing, recognize what mistakes they would have otherwise made if they were on the field, that sort of thing. And then you give them the opportunity in kind of light dustings, kind of maybe through that rookie season, so they don't kind of lose the interest in the game. And then the next year, you bring them in as your starter and you say, now go for it.
And that's ideal, but you also got to look at the situation. Like when Mahomes came out there, you guys already had a good starting quarterback in Alex Smith. So, it's someone to learn under who's been in the league, pop at his game. And then you look at, again, to play devil's advocate, I just look at AOC 12. Coming in as a rookie under turmoil and everything else coming into this year, I'm glad he got those reps out there, because if he didn't get those reps, there wouldn't be a quarterback competition in Las Vegas. It would just be, okay, we're going to hand it off to Minshew. So I'm glad that he got that experience coming in. He took his bumps and bruises. He learned from it. And I think it's just going to make him a better player this upcoming season. But as a whole, if you got the guy, already, who can, that can lead your team, then yes, if you can, it's ideal if you can let your rookie sit. But once the rookie passes up the starter, and just let's say a small injury and he gets on the field and performs well, you're never going back.
No, I actually agree with that as an approach. If your starter gets hurt and your rook comes in and shows out, I think you need to leave the rookie in. So that I will agree with. However, that's not what typically happens. and I also think that that's why having a good alternative option is also a big deal, as well as like a third option or practice squad guy or whatever the case may be. And the NFL has done a lot to kind of make that a viable option with having a veteran available on your practice squad, because it gives you that other option that you can kind of call that guy up and kind of for those 1 or 2 games and make it worth your while.
So what's your overall depth chart then with your QBs?
My overall depth chart?
Mm-hmm.
If I had to guess where they're at right now, I'd probably say Stidham's probably QB1. And I think they probably right now have Nix as, if I had to guess, just what I'm seeing now, Nix is QB3 and Wilson is QB2. I think there's certain things that they are not liking about what Nix is doing on the field just because he's still learning. And even though he's had some great throws are fantastic when it's the same play against similar people and you're used to kind of what you're seeing in front of you. I think what the challenge is that what's probably occurring is that they're probably seeing certain things where he's missing protections or missing certain looks, which is to be expected from a rookie quarterback, to be clear. So that's not me knocking Bo Nix. And I think that you're going to probably have to see him, process that stuff just a little bit faster. And also not only process it a little bit faster, but also learn to put the right guys in the right position. And AJ Bishop, rather, sorry. I think Stidham is at worst one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. At worst, one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league.
Hey, Bishop, I would have had Stiddy over Garoppolo or Hoyer.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying is, and so you got to remember, by making a comment like I just did, at worst, that makes him the 34th worst quarterback in the league. And even that might be too far down because there's several teams that are starting quarterbacks that probably shouldn't be. So he's probably within the top 30 or 25 in that general range, because every year you get the bottom tiers of the league churn out their quarterback. And I think Stidham is probably better than those kind of bottom tier guys. But ultimately, just because he's a bottom tier starting quarterback doesn't mean that he's good enough to then start for like the entirety of a season, for example. So I agree with that. But I also think that what you saw from Jarrett Stidham when you saw him come in for Russell Wilson was there was no drop off in play. None. Zero. It was a little
more efficient, really.
What? And he was efficient in certain elements of the game too, in the middle part of the field, right? And so AJ, actually, I'm going to have, again, if I'm nothing but consistent here, and so you're going to find that I kind of have a pretty straight and narrow path in terms of what I believe when it comes to this stuff. I actually think that the Broncos were in a somewhat similar position to what the Raiders are going to be in for this year as well. And this is what I mean. AP inherited an offensive system that was obviously not great. It didn't fit your players, and he was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You then started to see AP and the offensive staff there work with what they had and manipulate it to fit, to look like a competent offense on the field. But you can only change so much after you've done so much install for the season.
True.
Fast forward to 2024, 2025 in this season here. AP has all of that film at his disposal, and he knows who his guys are better than he did when he first took over as interim. So I think you're going to end up in a position and in a spot where the offense is going to better suit and better fit the players you have on the field. Now, flip the same script over to my Denver Broncos. It is well documented, and I have been on record on this show where I have indicated and said very point blank, you could see the plays that were left on the field by Russell Wilson because he missed wide open dudes, and guys were pissed. That was all on Russell Wilson. You also saw Russ hold on to the ball too long because he basically sees ghosts all the time.
Can't disagree with that. I do want to point out one of the comments in the chat. It's something that I've been saying too. So Rick, salute. He said if you have two QBs, you don't have one. From the late great John Madden, and I agree with him. And that's why the Raiders are still next year. They're going to be looking for a quarterback, unless one of these guys just just flash in the pan and just starts kicking butt. Then we won't have that conversation. But if it just plays out kind of mediocre, then yeah, it's going to be the whole same thing. But Richie, you got your up and coming young guy. Of course, Alex, you got the most amazing guy in the NFL.
Yeah, it's pretty good time.
Pretty sweet.
The one thing that Jack, your team is hoping for is that you guys have yourself what is effectively a Ryan Tannehill situation. You're hoping that you have a guy that was with the wrong guy before, and that AOC 12 now, not AOC 4, with a new coaching staff and a better offensive system, pops as at the very worst, a critical and steady cog. And at best, the guy that leads that offense and is the reason for success. So you're hoping for either one of those two scenarios to play out on the field. Obviously, in a worst case scenario, you end up with a guy that regresses and shows that he's not the guy, and you kind of know where that's going. But those two scenarios, both of those options should be excellent if you're a Raiders fan, because having the guy who is the reason, and even having a guy who is the cog that elevates the rest of that kind of system, that'll win you a Super Bowl. That could win you a Super Bowl in those scenarios for sure. There's nothing say you can't win a Super Bowl in that scenario.
Of course, you look at the Ravens.
Yep.
They had a game manager, not a star QB, but they had stars everywhere else. So
yep,
that's what you hope for.
So he was the critical cog, right? He was the guy that didn't make mistakes and that sort of stuff in that system, and he showed himself
lights out in the playoffs.
He did, and he showed that he could be that critical cog, and that won them that Super Bowl. Right now, the rest of the team was probably the bigger reason, but his play,
all-pro defense,
his play was still what kind of won them the Super Bowl. So, anyways, that I think is an important piece. I think that is something that kind of allows you to see that there is a place for a guy who's just that.
I am curious, Richie. I got to find it. So what current starters in the NFL do you think Stidham is better than? I'm curious.
Ooh.
Who you would think?
Well, I know Richie will say Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that is true. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I would actually and I mean this seriously, having seen both on the field. I would certainly put Stidham over Russell Wilson. I mean, Russ hasn't proven me otherwise. He can and he might, but right now, no.
Well, someone who's unproven. What about Will Levis? It's like he's unproven, so that's a possibility.
Maybe Bryce Young too.
Bryce Young, yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's a few.
I forgot the kid's name from Jacksonville.
Oh, Lawrence.
Lawrence, Yeah, that cat. You look at the stats. Him and Stiddy are like, I'm not Stiddy, but him and Minshew. Their numbers are looking the same. And one guy is a backup. One guy is like supposed to be this up and coming guy. So I kind of question him at this point.
Well, I'd say Kyler Murray has struggled for the Cardinals. He had a couple good seasons, and I'd say that he's kind of tapered off. If we're going to be honest, I'd say he's someone
I don't know about that one.
Well, I said there's certainly some arguments, to be made for him not, showing up or having longevity and struggling and all that kind of stuff. Going through, I think Bryce Young at least is certainly one that you can, put into that. I'm a show me guy. So for example, I would put all rookies in this rookie QB class, including Caleb Williams, until they show me otherwise. I would put Stidham over them as well. Now, does that mean that they can't quickly come like week 2 or 3, kind of reshuffle those rankings? Sure. But you're saying as of right now, when we're making this podcast, which for the record is June 5th,
the year of our Lord.
Yeah, March to date.
Yeah, and so
you're telling me, Richie, if you were rebuilding a team and you had your choice between all of the rookies and Stidham, you would rather have Stidham?
Not what I said.
Okay.
Not what I said. I said if you're looking at it today and you're to say, I have a game to play today, and it's an NFL game with 2 NFL teams with the players that are on each roster. My point right now is that there is a reasonable shot that week 1, you would probably end up with better play coming from, say, a player like Stidham than a good percentage of the other rookie QBs that are there. Now, does that mean that come week 1 of the season or week 2 of the season that those rookie quarterbacks are going to start leveling up because they might be maybe better arm, other intangibles, all that sort of stuff? Sure. But I'm talking about like right now, today, looking at these rosters, these rookie quarterbacks have not played a single snap at the NFL level. You have no idea what they're going to look like at the NFL level. And Stidham came in and won games last year at the NFL level, which is more than I can say for the current stock today for those rookie quarterbacks that were drafted.
I guess I look at it different. If we were playing a game today, and if I had to play Stidham over Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels, absolutely not. I mean, I'd roll with those cats all day long over Stidham. That's not even a question. If one of those kids were on my team right now, I would start him over the guys that we have right now on my team. There's not a question. And I know the Raiders wanted Jaden Daniels. And if the Raiders got Jaden Daniels, you don't think they would have put him in on game 1 over AOC 12 and Minshew? Absolutely, they would put him over those guys. So to say that, Stidham over those 2 guys, nah, I don't see it happening.
I'm saying in a game today.
That's what I'm saying. We're playing a game today. I would do that.
I'm not convinced that they're where they need to be yet at the NFL level.
Well, if you're saying, okay, if you only had OTAs and now I'm going to play, a quarterback that knows the system better after OTAs, well, then that would make sense. But after a full training camp, no.
That's what I just finished saying, though. I literally said as time progresses and these guys start leveling up.
Well, you said game 1, or game 2 or whatever. I was thinking, again, I wasn't thinking you were just saying OTs. I thought we had to go through the whole preseason to get these guys trained up.
And I still think you're going to be surprised of this QB class, of just how many of those young rookies go out on the field and suck. And I mean badly in week 1, 2, and 3. That you're going to expect them to be looking better. You have to remember, in that top tier of the draft, it's not just the fact that those quarterbacks, if they were on a much better team, might actually look better. That's true. The point being is those teams drafted in the top end of the draft because they sucked.
Yeah, because the dudes around there aren't very good.
Yes, because the other guys suck too, and that's the problem, right? Which is it's not just the quarterback; it's also the team around them. And there's more to a football
Absolutely.
team than just the quarterback. And
And
I
that's what
think
we talked about Houston, right? You know, they got a high draft pick, but again, it was because they traded Watson and had 3 first-round draft picks and bolstered their team, and then he comes walking into that, then that's a big difference.
Right. And so like my point here is that as an example, Jaden Daniels, can he be great? Possibly. Will he be great? Yet to be seen. Is he going to be the guy or the man week 1? I'm going to say odds are no.
Okay.
Right. Now, does that mean that as the season progresses, he's not going to level up? Certainly possible.
Okay.
Right?
I just want to turn it around a little bit.
Yeah.
So ask yourself the same question about Stidham. Is he going to be great?
Probably not.
Probably not.
But I'm not unrealistic, and I'm not going to sit there and pretend that he's going to be a world beater, right? I think that what you're looking for a guy from Stidham is your ceiling for a guy like him,
and play at that.
It is to basically be the critical cog that gets the job done. And so that's what you're looking for him to be. You're looking for him to be that critical cog who makes great decisions, throws to guys in the right spot, has an offense built around him that is basically suited for what he can actually do. And the same thing, frankly, goes for Zach Wilson as well. Get him better protection, a good running game, wide receivers that can kind of break and get open, and a competent head coach that puts together a scheme that doesn't allow you only one option at the wide out position that's open and have everyone else not be able to get open at all. And then you're sitting there trying to throw these hope and pray throws that the dude that is the best wideout on your team can catch into quadruple coverage. Because that's literally what happened when he was playing with the Jets. And it's just, you can't do it. Like, you just can't do it. And then the other thing,
and doing it wide on the run because you're running for your life on that team.
Exactly. And then Cowtown, you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
Which is when you have a coach that works with the wideouts and works with the other guys and starts saying, all right,
Burrow and Tua,
drop back, 1-2, throw there, wide out. You got to be here, and you got to be in the second or midpoint of your stride so that when you catch the ball, you're catching it in stride, so on and so forth. I think all of these sorts of things are so critical at the NFL level that we are completely undervaluing timing, coaching, scheme, the right players in the right positions, and I think we're overvaluing other things. Now, don't get me wrong, an elite quarterback can elevate and get you past some of those things, but there's only like 3 or 4 of those dudes in the league at best.
Well, you even look like Josh Allen. I mean, I feel like the window is closing on the Bills. I mean, I think it was there, but it feels like it's closing.
They're definitely resetting a little bit.
Correct. And so that's kind of what my point was when you're looking at players and teams and how guys fit in and all that kind of stuff. And you look at what the OTAs are showing for my Denver Broncos, and you're seeing Wilson step into that QB1 role, which is where I thought he might get slotted into at some point, because I think you saw flashes when he was with the Jets. And then you, as a competent head coach, you're always going to come out looking at dudes like that to say, he wasn't playing under me, and I made the dude that's over there in Pittsburgh that almost nobody else wanted. I made him look good, and now he's gone. Even after by all accounts, statistically in those like key categories, Russell Wilson had a pretty good season. Where his season really fell off the wagon is when you actually analyzed what those stats and how those stats came to be, you start to realize that it wasn't very good.
It's just a cancer that he brought to the locker room.
Yeah. So, but that's my point, right? Is that, stats have context to them, and you need to analyze the context as well. And then you also need to look at how these teams, the successful ones, got to be successful. And you'll often find that it's more than just a single quarterback. You often have a great offensive line. You often have a good running game. Often you'll have a star defensive player here and there. All of those things are relevant, and all of those things are important. And that's what's going to win you games.
And the cancer. So like last year, the Raiders had a cancer in Marcus Peters,
Yeah.
Marshawn's cousin. That guy didn't want to cover. He wanted just to play like he was a safety. And I'm glad they got rid of him.
But I do have a first-round pick. They got rid of him for that very reason.
Yeah, that's so true. And then I do have a question for you, Richie. So talking about like our teams, I didn't read the whole article, but I did started reading it that Estimé got hurt. So do you know what happened with him?
I hadn't heard anything on him yet before I started. Oh no, he didn't get hurt. Well, sorry, he did get hurt, but it was almost like it sounded like it was like a stinger type thing on his knee. Sorry, you're right. He did get hurt. It was a stinger on his knee. And in order to bring him back faster, they did a kind of a scrape on his knee area to kind of get him back into full health. So you get that from time to time when you end up with bone spurs. So I suspect that probably what happened is he ended up with what I would probably assume is a floater, where he had a small chip of bone that came off maybe somewhere in his leg or whatever. And it was starting to get into a spot that they didn't want it to get into. That's my guess from what I've heard, because it's been kind of, the specifics have been not robust, but it seems rather odd that you didn't hear about him getting carted off the field. It seems odd that you didn't hear about any of those sorts of things. He just kind of got hurt. And so I start to wonder if that's more of a player reported problem. And then doctors did their job, and then they found the thing, right? And NFL players go through these things, on a fairly regular basis. 4 or 5 week kind of recovery period is not abnormal. And if it is a bone or a weakened section of a bone or a joint as a result of a chip, I think the Broncos are doing the right thing by pushing him further out to allow his body to heal himself as close to fully as possible to avoid further injury. By and large, though, I am cautiously optimistic, given what I have heard. And sorry, the only reason I hesitated on it, because this happened last week, not this week. So I was like, "What do you mean he got hurt?" I was like, "Oh yeah, no, sorry, wait, he was hurt before." Yes.
Like I said, I just caught it like scrolling through things, and I just saw it just recently, so I missed it.
Yeah. So, anyways, my big thing on that is I think this is more of a precautionary measure, and I think if this were to happen in season, probably would have played through it. If it's what I think it was. If it's what I think. Now, assuming I'm right. Now, if I'm wrong, then so be it. But assuming I'm right, but the details I haven't heard.
Okay.
You saw, actually, I think Waller actually had something similar done on his knee with the Raiders, where he had the
see what happened with him.
Trying to remember when that was. It's just like in the early day Waller or like the later day Waller?
Early day.
Okay, so then it sounds like he'll recover then fine. So because the later Waller just wouldn't come back from stuff like that.
No, but the early day Waller had the scrape done, and then he had one of his best seasons that year and that year after, which then got him his contract. He had that scope and scrape kind of done, which I keep on calling like the standard NFL procedure of a guy that's
kind of just a tune-up.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a
tune-up.
Yeah, exactly.
Cleanse.
Yeah. It's like, hey, just go ahead and go in there, scrape the extra crud out of the joints there, and I'll be fine for next year. Let's just, let's go.
And that happens. Especially with running backs, and you're making cuts and using your knee and your knee ligaments a lot. So that stuff's kind of expected wear and tear.
And that's, again, one of those in and out style surgeries where those guys will go in one day and they're out same day in the afternoon walking. But they're with a brace just for stability purposes, just to allow their body to adapt and recover. And then out of an abundance of caution, they normally have a 3 or 4 week recovery.
Yeah, Waller, what a sad thing. At the time when the Raiders traded him for a 3rd rounder, I was not happy about that. But looking back on it now, I'm so glad it happened.
You're like, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
we fleeced them.
So with regards to all the stuff and everything on the teams, I think that's a good spot to probably leave it at in terms of off-season tune-ups and, all that kind of stuff, because I think you're going to hear a little bit more about those sorts of things from our various teams as time goes on. So I do expect over the next few weeks, you'll hear more of those types of things come out for each of our teams respectively. I do caution folks not to overreact when you hear those things. These are professionals that are seeing specialists that are much better than your family doctor. And I wouldn't be overly concerned. So I would just kind of let them do their thing, let them take care of their bodies the way that they need to. The only concerns that I would have are for folks that are kind of in their second year and their second injury deep. That would be something that I would be concerned with if I was a fan of your team, if you have a guy like that on your roster, because then you have to start questioning, now I'm seeing a trend, and that would certainly be something I'd be concerned with. But with that in mind, guys, I think that's going to do it for us in the show today. I think we covered off a fair amount of ground, and I do think, like we've said on previous shows, the AFC West, there's going to be a lot of prove it moments, I think, as we're progressing. Sure. We got the Chargers, who are going to have some prove it moments. I think the Raiders are in that same boat, and then the Broncos are going to be in a prove it moment as well. Simply because they did go out and get their quarterback, and they went out and pulled in for a trade and brought in another quarterback. So there's really no real excuses for the Broncos anymore, because all of these QBs and all of these players were brought in with Sean Payton as the head coach. And so we should be at minimum stable, I think, for the Denver Broncos. And of course, Alex, you have your team who the rich got richer effectively.
We do what we do.
Season. So let's just leave it at that.
Do what we do.
Yeah.
So, that is so true, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's just be real. It really is. But anyways, guys, until next week, where the West Side is the best side. Peace.
When I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle. Wait a minute, work hard for the car, so that's why it's all tinted. Wait a minute,